Okay, I can see we've got quite a few of you on now. So just wanted to say welcome to this morning's webinar on the best practice when applying for export health certificates. And I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Jessica and Andrew from Amivet. Amivet have been FDA service provider members for a long time, so hugely knowledgeable on all things to do with export health certificates. Just to let you know that this webinar will be recorded, so I can send around the slides and the recording to everybody after the webinar. And I'll also circulate Jess's and Andrew's email just in case you've got any specific questions that you'd like any help with. There will be some time for questions at the end, so if you either want to put them in the chat box as we go through, please do, or at the end of the presentation, you can put your video on and unmute yourself and ask any questions to Andrew and Jess. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew.
Right, so thank you very much, Mel, and good morning, everybody. So yeah, I think many of you will know us as Amivet. So we are official vets, and many people ask, actually, are we veterinary surgeons? And yes, the vets are like proper vets that have spent time in clinical practice as well. That then sort of gives us the knowledge and experience to sign all the animal health attestations. So as I think many of you will be aware that the export health certificates, the vast majority are related to food and products of animal origin, mainly meat and dairy derived, but fish and egg come in as well, and things like sort of pet food and animal byproducts, which are probably not that relevant to people on the call. We do a few food ones, for example, tractors and hay, but they're sort of pretty obscure. So this really is going to be a very general sort of broad brush approach, trying not to go into too many sort of specifics, because you can end up in all sorts of rabbit holes on those, but we're very happy to look into those specifically with people, you know, offline really. Right, Mel did give me control before. I'm struggling to move slides on, so you might need to do it for me. Okay, so in terms of sort of general guidance, how to make the process as easy as possible, I think one of the key bits really is to do your homework and make sure that you're ready well in advance. We get quite a few inquiries from people that are quite literally wanting to ship it tomorrow, or even worse, they shipped it 2 weeks ago and they want to get a health certificate afterwards. So one thing we absolutely cannot do in any circumstance is to sign the certificate once the goods have left GB. That's actually written into the legislation that the goods have to be under our control, such that we could actually sort of go and check them and so on. So, you know, it's the fairly basic stuff, you know, what you're wanting to send and where's it going to. Every importing country will have its own particular regulations and wording for the certificate for it. And many of them, there are constraints as to what ingredients can go into it, where they have to be sourced from, and whether they need particular approvals, and so on. And also, you know, again, it's outside our remit, but a lot of them do also need things like sort of particular import permits, halal or kosher or so on as well. So you do need to just make sure that you've got all this information in advance. And one of the common questions that we get, I think particularly Jess as our business development manager deals with a lot of these, is does the product actually need an EHC at all? There's no simple answer to it, and we can certainly help try and guide that. But we find that, you know, the products that do, great, yeah, we can help those and get them sorted. But there are some products, particularly some of the highly processed goods, the shelf-stable products, for example, that simply don't need a health certificate signed by a vet. It may be that you need a certificate signed by one of the local environmental health officers at the council, or it may not need a health certificate at all from anybody. Sometimes you know, it can go with a private attestation that is signed by the importer. That's something we do see for the European Union for the shelf-stable composites not containing any meat. And there are times where no one's ever actually looked at doing the export before, so we almost have to look at whether an EHC needs creating from scratch, which again is a very slow process. And it can take months, years even to get those ready in some cases. Okay, so next slide, please. So if we find that the EHCs are required, then a lot of you will be familiar with the ecosystem, the EHC online. This is run by the APHA. So again, you would need to register on the account to be able to make the application. There are currently just over 1,000 different EHCs to choose from. So again, we can help you guide the right one so that you're picking the right EHC for your particular product and destination. In terms of how long they take, the majority of the EU ones, which is most of our workload these days, are pretty much instantaneous. We will get those sent through by email. But there are some of the less common certificates that are still not digital. And they need applying for separately by email to APHA. And of those, some of them will actually still get sent out in the post. So again, we need to factor in that delay with them. When you're making the application, again, there's a whole load of questions that you need to get through in terms of what the product is, where it's going, the origin of it, the ports and so on. Really important to try and get that information as accurate as you can. The digital certificates, generally speaking, we can edit the information, but again, the more we have to edit, the more the risk of mistakes, typos, and so on creeping in. And certainly some of the postal certificates, some countries do permit handwritten changes, so we can sort of cross out, stamp it, initial it, and so on. But there are certain certificates, for example, some of the China and the Canada ones, that don't allow any handwritten information at all. They have to be sort of fully typed or fully printed. So again, if the application is wrong, we can't change it. We have to go back and get a new one. But again, the more we can work together in terms of getting that information correct, because some of this information won't be within our knowledge to know in terms of who the importer is, the port of entry, and so on. So it would really help if we can get that right from the start. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so in terms of choosing your official vet, and again, this is very much not being a shameless plug, other OBs are available. But the main questions that you want to look at them is do they know what they're doing? So Amivet, we've been going for around about 15 years now. We have a sort of a huge team over the country, and within our own team we have around about 50 or 60 vets. We also are part of the IBC Evidencia network, which again have 1,200 practices over the country and several hundred more OBs as well. There are some companies that will just do this on a very occasional basis, or might only be experienced, for example, in milk and not in meat and so on. So do ask the question, does your vet, have they signed this particular certificate before? Do they know what they're doing with it? Where are they based? If you're just local, shipped from one warehouse, and you've got a vet that is 10 minutes down the road, then great, that might work very well. But if that warehouse was to change, or if the vet had to go and look at the goods elsewhere, have they got the availability, the flexibility to be able to change that? What's the availability like? Can they do it to suit you in terms of morning, noon, night? Can they cover weekends? Do they have an out of hours service if there's any delays? Can they accommodate short notice changes? Again, it's worth just asking as well. What happens if there's only one vet in the practice and they're on holiday or ill? Is there somebody else that knows what they're doing that can step in and cover them? Can they, flexibility in terms of any changes? Have they got that? And also, obviously price does have to come into it as well. Do they charge per certificate? Do they charge a visit fee? Is it charged on a day rate? All these things have to factor in, and that there's no one size fits all. But again, we're very happy to sort of be sort of open as to what we can or can't do, and that there are some parts of the UK that we don't have great cover in, and we'll hold our hands up and say, look, if you're in the far-flung part of Cornwall, we're not going to be able to get there very easily, for example. So again, it's just something to look at. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so it's then a question of looking at what products you actually want to send. And again, certainly for the EU, there are very strict definitions, in the legislation as to what is covered by what. So we have the fresh meat, which effectively, in simple terms, it still looks and smells like fresh meat. It's raw. We then get the meat preparations, which is where it has additives, things like sort of salt or seasoning added in, or any sauces, but effectively it's still raw. We then have the meat products, which is where it becomes sort of processed through either sort of cooking, curing, that type of thing. So sort of bacon, and then sort of the cooked meats, the cooked hams, the cooked chickens, become the meat products. Dairy, again, pretty obvious, the yogurts, they have the cheeses, the milks, that type of thing. We do quite a bit of fish as well. And then I think where people do get confused is the difference between the composite products and the compounds. And again, this is particularly relevant to the European Union. So the composite is where we have processed animal ingredients together with plant material, but it has to be an integral part of the processing rather than just there to add flavour. So, for example, a pizza that has got, say, cooked ham and processed cheese on top is a composite. Whereas if you've got, say, a yogurt with fruit in, the argument is that the fruit is simply there to add taste and flavour. So that actually remains a dairy product. So again, it's complicated, and there are some absolute nightmare products that we do spend hours going around in circles with on that one. And again, it's sort of, we could have a whole sort of webinar on composites itself. But I think as a broad brush, that sort of gives you an idea. But that is very different from a compound product, which effectively is two different products together that need two or more health certificates. So, for example, if you've got say a raw steak with a raw sort of butter sachet in there as well, again, there's no plant material in there to make it a composite. So effectively, you would have to have a fresh meat certificate and a dairy certificate as well. And there are some products that we do that end up with sort of 3 or 4 different EHCs all for the same item. How they get linked together, again, will vary from country to country as to where it's going to, but again, they do get complicated. But in terms of a general approach, that is the difference between the composites and the compounds. One thing always to look at is that the BCP, or the Border Control Post of Entry, need to agree with the classification as well. So although we might think it's something as a composite, if they disagree, then unfortunately they get the casting vote. And we do spend quite a lot of time going to and fro with them to try and agree an approach for some of these products. Okay, next one, please. So again, another thing that we find is quite challenging with people, certainly the first time they do this, is can they get any supporting evidence? So we can't just take your product and ship it without any evidence of what it's come from at all. And again, the evidence that we will need does vary hugely depending on the type of product and where it's going to. But the general rule of thumb is we need to know where it's come from, what species it is it free from certain diseases? Has it been processed? That could be pasteurizing, smoking, what's it had, how long for, does it meet the specific requirements of the certificate? And also the big question then is who can sign that declaration? And it would normally be somebody that has that personal knowledge of what they're signing is true. So typically with the meat, it would come from one of the vets at the slaughterhouse, where we've got further processing, things like sort of dairy and fish that is then not under official controls. For example, it could be somebody like the technical manager at the exporter that again would have that knowledge of what the process would be. But certainly APHA are very hot at checking on these support documents. So again, we get audited all the time, so we have to be able to provide these. And I think it's one thing that Jess will probably agree that it does take time to dig out, is to be able to get those supporting documents right back to the source. One thing we do see quite a bit of is people will go to the local cash and carry or local supermarket, grab a load of things off the shelf, and then expect to be able to export them. The relationship then obviously is not between the original manufacturer and the exporter. And in those cases, they simply will not play ball at all. We've got no chance of getting the supporting evidence. So effectively, we can't sign it. So we do need to have that evidence. But again, it does vary dramatically depending on what it is and where it's going to. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so those of you who've had the joys of working with traces, this is the EU's import-export system. It's probably best described as clunky, but it makes a Windows 95 look modern and up to date. It is an absolute nightmare to use. But effectively, every premises that is able to export or import to the EU has to be listed on this traces database. And because we're not in the EU, we can't actually easily access it to be able to check. And even the EU itself doesn't update it very often. One of the common things that we find is that if we put an approval number or a health mark on the certificate that is not in traces, that's probably one of the commonest reasons why things get held up or rejected. So again, it's really important that we sort of try and get compatibility so that we know that the premises that you're exporting from is on traces where it needs to be. And again, it's a really complicated system that, I don't want to go into too much detail at this point. But when the importer creates the CHED, which is the Common Health Entry Document, which is effectively the mirror image of the export health certificate, that itself does not check with traces, unfortunately. So there's no sort of cross-checking. And so, the whole process, I'm not going to lie, is complicated. Obviously, we'll work with you, but we need to make sure that your premises and also your suppliers, in many cases, are listed as approved for export to the EU. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so another thing that we commonly see as an issue is typos. So again, in terms of the part one, and again, there's a little sort of screenshot there of the typical composite certificate. So the liability for this sits firmly with the exporter. You're deciding who you are, where you're sending it to, what port it's going in through, where it's been loaded, and so on. So again, this needs to be accurate, and the BCPs are absolutely ruthless. Okay, there is no margin of error on this. We've had rejections where people have sort of simply mistyped a number or a letter or put an I instead of a 1. That they really are very hot on this. So it does need to be as accurate as possible. The second part of the certificate, which is all the health attestations in terms of things like sort of BSE and processing, and obviously, yeah, that is down to us to complete. Where it's going into the EU, the certificate will normally come in both English and one of the official languages of entry to the EU. So the French, for example, obviously want the French version. The Dutch, the Icelandic, and I think the Norwegians will generally accept it just in English. But again, most of our vets don't speak these foreign languages, so we just have to rely on the paragraphs being in the same numbering as an official translation. So we said the BCPs are pretty ruthless, and they certainly are. There are very limited situations where we can make replacement. So the legislation permits typos as long as they don't affect the health status of the shipment. We sometimes can accept replacements, but again, there's a delay time in getting that. And again, that is very much at the discretion of the BCP that, sometimes they will accept a replacement, and sometimes we can have exactly the same situation, different BCP, and they will say no, in which case the option then is normally to bring the goods back and recertify or to have them destroyed. There's sort of no easy way of getting around that. So again, let's try and get it right first time. One other thing that we do occasionally see is that the BCP of entry will change between applying for the certificates and the goods actually reaching there, either through sort of weather or shipping changes and so on. The legislation does permit the BCP, or sorry, should I say the legislation may permit the BCP to accept a change, but what we can't do is change the language of the certificates without getting a new application. So again, it's a little bit of a grey area as to whether you can change the BCP. In theory, yes. The reality tends to be not quite so simple, unfortunately. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so one other thing just to consider is that just because it comes into GB doesn't mean it can go back out again. Already there has been divergence between the rules, whether that will continue or not is anybody's guess. But we've not implemented some of the more recent legislation, such as the animal health regulations from 2022. And obviously for the first couple of years post-Brexit, our borders were, let's face it, pretty much wide open. Let's not beat around the bush. The BTOM, the border target operating model, is now sort of in place. It's still not quite complete and still perhaps rather leaky, should we say. But obviously we've also got issues with the labelling. So I think you're all aware of the not for EU labelling, which I think is just being sort of currently postponed. But again, that has caused a lot of issues in terms of production runs and certainly with Northern Ireland. But as a general rule, if goods legally come back into the EU, sorry, come legally from the EU into GB, then yep, that's fine for GB circulation. But in terms of then going back to the EU, it's normally a case of they either can simply be stored, so they can't be tampered with, repackaged on the storage certificate, so that's without any real sort of change at all, or they have to be fully processed and effectively converted into a new product before they can go back. And one thing that we do see a lot of challenges with is the triangular trade rules, so that, for example, cheese cannot be brought in, sliced, and sent back again. It would either have to come in and literally go back as it came, or converted into, say, a pizza or a completely different product to be able to go back in again. But we do get quite a few inquiries from people that, from a health point of view, no issues at all, but simply the triangular trade rules, which effectively is EU protectionism, don't allow it to go back out again, unfortunately. Okay, next one, please. Northern Ireland, again, it's kind of got to put in both camps, half in, half out. The theory, it's part of the UK internal market with the green lane and no checks is perhaps a little bit of a myth. There are limited checks, but it certainly makes life easier with the NERM scheme for those that are eligible. And obviously then we also have the red lane, which effectively is the full health certificate route. And we do see some clients that are choosing to go down the red lane route simply because of the labelling issue. It's actually easier and cheaper for them to get everything in through the red lane and not bother with the labelling than it is to go through the green lane. There is also the MAS, which is the Movement Assistance Scheme. This is a subsidy, in effect, that the government will pay up to £150 per certificate to cover the costs of certification, which again obviously is a help for many people in terms of going through the through to Northern Ireland. Okay, next one, please. We also get quite a few changes to the EHCs and the wordings and what we need to be able to certify. So one that came out a year or so ago was the requirement for annual farm visits. Again, this is not set in GB legislation, but it is a requirement of the EU certificate. So again, we've had to take steps to comply with that. We've also had a big change of certificates last month. For reasons best known to the EU, they've released about 20 of the common certificates that have an extra paragraph coming in that all relates to limits on antimicrobials, growth promoters, growth hormones, that type of thing. But then we have to cross it out for the next 2 years. So yeah, go figure on that one. There's also going to be a big change to gelatin in January. That's if it's derived from bovine bones, it will then require certification. If it's come from hides or pigs or fish, then generally speaking, it doesn't. It can still go on the private attestation. So again, there will be a big composite change coming through in January. Any of you that export honey will be aware of the imminent changes that require honey to be on the registered list. And again, we're still chasing to actually get that list from APHA as well. And again, many of you may be familiar with the GEPS, or the Groupage Export Facilitation Scheme, which effectively makes life easier for sort of retailers in effect. There's currently that is due to expire at the end of next year. DEFRA are working quite hard behind the scenes to simplify and push the Royal College to extend that, which we're hoping to get some updates from by June. But again, the exporter needs to be a member of the groupage scheme. We can then use that to make life easy in terms of getting monthly updates, monthly visits, rather than to do them daily. But again, in terms of how that's going to change next year, I don't know at the moment. I'm hoping it's going to be sort of more simple, but I suspect that the number of people that can do the GEPS visits is more likely to be strictly limited to official vets rather than just any vet or certification support officers under their control, but to be confirmed. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so a bit of a whistle stop, I'm afraid. A lot to take on. I tried not to go into sort of too much detail, more to sort of just highlight the so the key bits really. So more than happy, I've just myself sort of take any general questions, or again, if you want to get in touch individually to discuss any more specific detailed questions about your particular products, then absolutely fine to do that as well.
Thanks, Andrew. If anybody does have a question for Andrew, please just pop yourself off mute and ask away.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi, lads.
We've got a live job where you guys have been extremely helpful, and it's happening today. So I just wanted to go, if you go back to slide 7, please. And I'd just like to go through, because it might help other people here, with how we had difficulties and how we kind of overcome these difficulties. So slide 7 was to do with the declarations by the exporter. And we were exporting, there was 3 consignments. One was chicken, one was it mutton, and the other was it beef stew.
Yeah.
And what happened was we had to keep going through this form, because they were for example, the consignee, which was Aldi in Germany, they were putting the Aldi contacts in the UK. And so there was like little tiny things which you referred to before about being really going through with a fine tooth comb. And so we actually found 7 mistakes, but we were there to support and say, look, you need to do this. But we were also consulting with Amivet about certain aspects of this. And so we had 3 consignments. And what we did was we actually separated them into chicken, mutton, and beef. They all collected at the same time, but we were concerned that just one consignment could jeopardize the whole lot. And that's exactly what happened today. We've got the mutton, which is being held up, and the beef and the chicken have gone through. But there was also a further complication with where we use FedEx, and they said that they under their guidelines they were unable to carry foodstuffs. And it was like, well, this is not. We've identified this with the commodity codes which were provided by Amivet, and because the driver wasn't fully conversant with it, it meant that the law actually says you cannot export from a business to an individual in Europe rather than a business to a business. So we kind of clarified that, and it probably took there's probably been, let's say, 20 hours worth of work to get 5 boxes out to Europe, of which there's only 1 box being held up. So I just wanted to explain this to hopefully some of your customers or people online who have had similar difficulties, have just physically given up. But we were that focused upon, because a sample can turn into a full pallet, can turn into a full trailer load, a full container load. And I think having the level of expertise at our fingertips, and through you guys, and also a lot of the grief that we went through in terms of double checking the documentation. I'm not saying it's 100% success, but at least we've got partial success, and we can maybe learn from that. And I just wanted your thoughts really on what percentage of samples or smaller quantities which you're asked to process actually are successfully delivered into the EU.
Yeah, and then some valid points in there. I mean, for example, if we're looking at, the fresh meat, then yes, it is a separate certificate for, sort of poultry, one for lamb, one for beef, and so on. And obviously, if they're all on the same vehicle, got the same shipments, then yes, the BCP, may say, well, yeah, 2 out of 3 are fine, but the other one isn't. Whether they will then hold the whole lot or just release the ones that have passed is then very much a decision to look at between the two parties there. The CN codes again, is not sort of really our area of expertise, but again, it is making sure that you're getting the right code on there. But again, I think, it sort of boils down to the facts of, yep, absolutely, these need to be, as accurate as possible so that, that we minimize this risk of delay. And, from our point of view, really, the workload to ship one chicken breast versus, a container load of the same chicken breasts is minimal, really. So, volume doesn't come into it. We still need the same level of evidence, there's still the same number of documents and so on to check. And it can be hard for first-time exporters. They're shipping a very small quantity. It does almost become economically unviable to ship that small amount. But as you say, if you get through a small shipment and that's successful, then you can tend to build up to bigger loads in the future. And certainly one thing we do see with groupage loads is in terms of identities and seals. So if you're just shipping one pallet as part of a groupage, your paperwork might be absolutely spot on. But if everybody else is wrong, then you risk your products being delayed even through no fault of your own. The other thing that we do tend to find with those is the issue of vehicle seals. So normally the BCP prefer to have a seal on the back of the vehicle, which acts then as their identity check, which is fine if we're loading a full container load, and the vet can then apply the seal and add it to the health certificate. If, however, you've got, say, goods from 20 different exporters, all with different THCs on, there is no way that every certificate is going to be able to have that seal information on there. So the BCP then have to unload it to be able to check each individual pallet, either through a physical check of the products or through pallet seals if they can do that. They absolutely hate it. Some of them don't have the space or the temperature control for it. Some just refuse to do it. Although Northern Ireland did produce 2 models of groupage, both sort of the hub and spoke and the linear model, that they just don't work in practice. So yeah, it is a nightmare. So I hope does that answer the question okay? Yeah.
Thanks,
great.
Fez.
Okay. Yeah.
Anybody else got any questions? I think you gave some information about you were talking, you mentioned some certificates weren't digital yet, and they took longer to come through. I just wondered what kind of products those related to.
Yeah, to be fair, it's some of the obscure ones, and we don't actually get very many of them. So they've digitized the vast majority now. It's been a slow process, and it'll be some of the ones that they only produce a handful of certificates a year. Jess, I can't think of any we've had recently. I think most are digital these days, aren't they?
I think they are most.
You can, long-winded process, but you can effectively send APHA a pre-printed next day delivery label that they will get out next day. You just need to make sure you agree with the vet as to where it's getting sent to, because they have to go effectively to the vet's registered address, and they can be sent direct to the premises of dispatch, but you then have to then also fill in a authorizing declaration signed by the vet to say they're going to be not opened and not tampered with, etc., etc., etc. So it does get very laborious. But to be fair, the vast majority are digital these days, and I suspect in due course, and they will also, more and more will go digital. Just as a slight aside, some of you may have been involved in the eCerts, the electronic certificate trial last year, where effectively the whole process was digital. And currently we have to provide a wet printed signed copy of these certificates. There was a trial for Northern Ireland, which did go reasonably well for government IT, but they ran into issues in terms of how to link the compound certificates together. And then I think they ran out of money and half the team left. So I think it's kind of in sort of in limbo at the moment. I mean, it would make our life a lot easier. So instead of having to sit there and get a little red stamp out and ruler and rule out all sorts of paragraphs, it would all be click of a button. It would make it a lot quicker, a lot cheaper. And if it can interface into traces, it would make life a lot easier for everybody. But there doesn't seem any urgency within DEFRA or any time scale to get that back up and running, unfortunately.
Yeah, it would be really useful, I think, to get some of the information and links, particularly to the traces, the MAS scheme that you mentioned, also the changes coming up to, in legislation that you mentioned. If we could get sort of any updates as and when they come in, that would be brilliant, and then we can sort of put that out to members so they're fully aware of it.
Yeah, so the next one we're aware of is going to be the gelatin changes to the composite and also the private attestations the 29th of Jan, Jess, I think, isn't it? Sometime the end of Jan. There was a slight panic. It was this week because traces have been updated wrongly, but panic is now over. But you know, so certainly from an FDEA point of view, in terms of sort of, you know, lobbying for electronic certification would be a good drum to bang.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions from anyone?
Yes, please.
Hi there.
I export cake. So that's a composite bakery product. And generally I don't need health certificates for the EU because they just want a private attestation. However, I've got a client in Colombia, a new client, who said they want a export health certificate, and they sent me an example of what they wanted. They sent me an example of one from a biscuit supplier, which was just from their local authority, with a load of stamps on it and so forth. And I said, oh, can I not just go to my local authority and get this export health certificate? And they said, yeah, that's all you have to do. And so I've checked, and that appears to be the case. So am I right in saying that you're parallel to that, and that, you know, I don't, one of the options is just to go to my local authority? Is that right?
Pretty much, yes. I mean, certainly ambient cake to the EU is fine to go on a PA. If you send it frozen, you probably find that you will need an EHC from a vet to sign that. Yeah, I mean, the local authorities tend to cover the lower risk goods. So lots of sort of confectionery, biscuits and cake. Effectively, the local authority, the environmental health officer, will say, yeah, products are fit for consumption, meet GB legislation, stick, sign, stamp, and off they go, and we never get involved in there at all. So, you know, if they're happy to do that, then absolutely fine. What we tend to find in practice is that people contact the local authority and they sort of look very blank and haven't got a clue what they're doing. And EHO availability can also be a bit hit and miss depending on the authority as well. Some are very good, some not so much. But yeah, things like that we shouldn't really need to get involved with. We do, I think, Jess, some sort of composite type products over to the Middle East, don't we? Which again get a bit messy. Some end up needing the EHC for example, the milk components or the egg components, but the definition of a composite is purely EU only.
Yeah.
Right. It's because it's made with egg and butter. The Colombians are very concerned about that, and despite the fact that it's been heated to a huge temperature for hours on end. And I in terms of the local authority, we've got BRC grade AA. I mean, you know, that is the, you know, absolutely top food safety certification. Will the EHO still want to come out and look at everything every time, or will they accept that if we've got that level of food safety certification, they don't need to be out there every time we do a shipment?
but a question for them rather than me. Certainly from a veterinary point of view, there is a process called remote certification. This is where we have low risk goods. So for example, a cake from a stable supply chain. If the vet is sort of happy with the standards and quality and supporting documents from a supplier, then we do sometimes get to the stage where we don't need to come and visit every single time. We might do some on remote basis, either through sort of photos, video checks, that type of thing. Certainly for things like fresh meat, we're not permitted to do that. So I think it would be reasonable for them to say that they didn't need to come out every time. But again, they're the ones putting the name to it, so it's really down to them.
Okay, final question. Going back to the first slide where we've got to register, if we're using an EHO, have we still got to register for that business with the government website?
No, you do for the EHCs or for the private attestations, but I believe the sort of the local authority documents, they just sort of produce them in-house, and they're not sort of controlled as such by APHA. So I don't believe there's any requirement to register, that they will just produce those for you locally.
Okay. Okay, that's great. Thanks very much for your time.
No worries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Hi, Andrew. Just one further question regarding samples again. We were asked to provide we're doing 2 consignments with Amivet at the moment, and one of them we were asked to provide it's like a security label on the sample box. I haven't actually seen one yet because it will be dispatched from the manufacturer. What could you maybe, I don't know, share with the group what sort of sticky label it refers to? Because I was we haven't dispatched this one yet. I was a little bit confused about, would this security label number be registered at some point on the documentation, so that the documentation refers to some sort of security stick? It kind of goes over the edge of it. If you buy like a high value product like an iPhone or something like that, and you have these stickers that go over. Could you clarify that, please?
Have we asked you to do that?
The vet said that we would need some sort of so it was like some sort of security sticker, and we as our warehouse, we didn't have any of those stickers. I mean, I can forward the detail to you if you want. It's just like as a general rule, because we weren't asked for it on the one which was dispatched yesterday.
Was this for eggs?
Pardon?
This on the egg one, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
We're talking pallet seals then, Jess?
It was more because of a smaller quantity, it wasn't quite a pallet, so it was a seal for the boxes instead.
Yeah, so again, there's no set format for these. That Dara in Northern Ireland did produce a very useful presentation in terms of sort of good and bad seals, but effectively we were saying before about the identity check on the product. So if there is a way of sort of security sealing a part load, it means that the BCP then don't have to go into the detail of checking the individual products, because they can rely on that identity. Because the aim is that security label, that number, would then be on the health certificate, so they can cross-reference the goods to the certificate. So there's different sort of styles, but effectively the rule is that they've got to be sort of tamper-proof, single use, and no way of getting in. So normally on a pallet, they sort of effectively cross over at right angles, and then there's a way of sort of sealing it to get through. So I think if we can perhaps dig out the DERA reference, and we can then forward that to Mel to sort of forward on regarding the pallet seals. Again,
these are sample seals rather than pallet seals. Okay.
Okay.
Talk about 1 and 2 boxes here. And then the other difference was the one which was dispatched yesterday. They got some sort of like Ziploc, and as I say, we've gone to a great deal of trouble here, and I'm just want this sort of clarification as to what's acceptable, what's not, and so we can put out some sort of general information as a freight company to support exporters, so that they know really, because I'm still a bit fuzzy, and I'd like that clarification, please.
Yeah, I mean, there's no definitive, you must use brand X, brand Y, brand Z. It is, and again, so we'll dig out the DARA guidance, but effectively it is something that has a unique number and is tamper-proof, so that somebody couldn't open it, change the boxes, and put a new one on. But there's no definitive sort of standard or format for it. But again, I think if we sort of dig out the DARA guidance and sort of share that with the audience, then that will probably help to answer that one. Again, I don't know the specifics of the individual product that you're talking about. We can certainly sort of liaise with the vets in question to look at that one. But I guess it will be different with a small box compared to a full pallet just in terms of what fits on it.
I also suspect it might be different as well, as because Jess has been helpful with both of these in terms of the product might require something like egg as opposed to meat. I don't know, but we know this is kind of a learning process for us, and we're just happy that we've got that support. And I'm sorry for being so pedantic about this, but at least if we know where we are from the start, then we're going to go correct.
I mean, the product shouldn't make a difference. It's the fact that the BCP have to do a documentary check, which is check all the paperwork, which is 100%, an ID check, which again is 100%, and that is matching the seal or the pallet seal or the pallet label or the actual products themselves. And then they do a physical check, which again is risk-based between sort of 3 and 30%, which is sort of physical, open boxes, take samples, temperature checks, microbial tests, all sorts, which again can cause delays. But again, that is more risk-based, depending on the product. So a fresh meat will get a lot more checks than sort of a composite, for example. And if you get a fail, so we had a company a while back that it was Fish Bay, I think, wasn't it, Jess, from memory? The companies that failed was it Enterobacter test? They then had to have their next 10 samples tested as a routine before they were allowed to sort of let them go through again. So if there is an issue, it does cause challenges.
Thank you. Could I just I've got a little bit of information for Robert Dark there. And that was the BRC equivalent in the EU is called International Featured Standards. But there's also, it just might be worth doing a bit of research. There's an organization called the Global Food Safety Initiative, which I believe kind of like is the equivalent. I mean, you'd obviously need to do your own research yourself. It's just that whilst we were chatting, I just did a little bit of research and thought it might be of some help.
Great, thanks, Les. Well, it always opens a lot of questions, and it's one of the topics that we always get asked about at the FDA. So it's good to have that refresh of what needs to be done. And if Andrew, like I said, we'll be disseminating all the different bits of information and changes to any sort of legislation that comes up, and fingers crossed that everything starts to get digitalized in the not too distant future.
Hold your breath.
So I'll send round Andrew's slides, contact details, etc. And just wanted to let you know about a couple of other things that we've got coming up. Tomorrow we've got a webinar with Red Tractor. They have been done some extensive research into the consumer attitudes globally to British food and drink. So if you want to hear the findings of their research, do come in at 11 o'clock tomorrow online. We'll also be hearing from our in-market partner in Germany, who will be giving some specific views about German consumer attitudes to British food during that webinar as well. We actually the German in-market partner Clatti will also be doing an in-market market insights webinar next week on the 3rd, which I think is Monday. So if you're interested in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, do tune into that one as well. And then finally, just a reminder that the Export Awards entries are due in by the end of this week. So if you feel like entering an award, please do take a look online. The application form's there. So that's it from me. And I just want to say thank you to Andrew and Jess for your time today. And like I said, I'll be circulating the details of this webinar to everybody that's registered later on today. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. I've just added the link to the pallet seal guidance and groupage in the chat there as well.
Ah, perfect. I'll add that to
Yeah.
the email as well.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, thanks very much,
All right,
everyone.
thank you. Bye now.
Have a good day. Bye.